Okay, Autumn, we're going to begin here.
Okay.
I'd like to welcome all of you to session 4 of the 2024 Spectrum Institute for Teaching and Learning workshop series. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We have two presenters. The first presentation is titled Investigating the Role and Use of the Spectrum in Physical Education, Teacher Education, PEAT programs. We have Christopher Mellor, Assistant Professor from Adelphi University, New York, New York, and Jamie Brunsdon from University of Memphis in Memphis, Tennessee, presenting today. You have 30 minutes for a presentation and questions. Begin when you're ready, gentlemen.
Second to share the screen here. All right, can you see my screen?
Yes,
Yes.
we can.
All right, great. All right, well, thank you to the Institute for allowing us to share this work. As Dr. Byers said, I'm Christopher Mellor, Assistant Professor at Adelphi University. I'll let my co-presenter introduce himself as well.
Hello, everyone. Jamie Brunsdon from the University of Memphis.
We'll be going through our study called Investigating the Role and Use of the Spectrum in Physical Education Teacher Education Programs. And Jamie, I'll let you start off here.
Great. Next slide, please. Okay, so as we all know, spectrum theory is a steadfast conceptual framework intended to explain the act of teaching and learning. Based on what we currently know about the spectrum, there are 11 universal teaching styles. These can be broadly positioned into the reproductive and productive clusters. We could also break these down further into a category which Chris and I both favor, is the direct styles group, which includes styles A and B, the student assessment group, which includes styles C, D, and E, and then the discovery styles group, which includes styles F, G, and H, and then the student initiated group, which is styles I, J, and K. And the idea is that someone employing a teaching style will follow this pre-impact, impact, and post-impact structure, which we're all very familiar with. Next slide, please, Chris. So based on our reading, there would appear to be, at least to us, 3 golden periods of spectrum research. The first golden period occurred between the late 1960s and the late 1980s. And it was during this period that we saw significant theoretical expansions and development as it pertained to the nature of the spectrum framework. This was predominantly driven by Musker and Sarah themselves, but also in the support of various people. And this kind of period, I think, was based on gap filling. I think these people were receiving feedback linked to the theoretical framework, and then they were building it from there. And this was specifically relevant to terminology, gaps within the theory, but also the visual schema that was being used. The second golden period occurred from the 1990s to the late 2000s, and it was kind of in this period where we get the impression that the spectrum was receiving significant empirical development, but also scrutiny from various areas and angles, and was predominantly kind of driven by various kind of disciples in some way of kind of Musker and Sarah. We're talking about Goldberger here, and obviously very thankful to share a space with other people on this kind of Zoom, Nikos, Curtis Smith, Mark, kind of pioneers of the spectrum. The current period, or this third golden period, occurred from kind of the early 2000s and is kind of what we're going through now, what we're experiencing. And while we can't really define what the level of impact this period will have, there's an aspiration that we're going to see significant theoretical but also empirical development as it pertains to the spectrum. Pioneered by the work of Susie and Pill, but also the kind of the leaders of the Spectrum Institute. And so we're expecting there to be kind of broad theoretical development about the spectrum itself and the kind of directional focus that the spectrum is going to have. But also, I think we're going to expect there being multiple spectrum strands. So various kind of interpretations or lines of spectrum scholarship developing. And that's all as a result of kind of the leadership from Susie and Pill, but also the Spectrum Institute. Next slide, please, Chris. So despite this, however, there would appear to be significant gaps in the literature across all kind of golden periods, which is, we can look at all forms of literature in that way. But as it relates to this study, little is known about how and why teachers and teacher educators come to know and understand the spectrum in the ways that they do. We need to know more about the extent with which teachers and teacher educators' background prior to and then subsequently immediately following their introduction to the spectrum impacted their perspectives and practices regarding PE and PEAT, if it did have an impact. We also need to investigate the level of compatibility or incompatibility between one's socialization experiences to the theoretical foundations of the spectrum, and subsequently how that impacts teachers and teacher educators' ability to read the spectrum into existence. Next slide, please. So spectrum theory served as the conceptual framework. However, occupational socialization theory was the theoretical framework that we used. Most of you would be familiar with this theory, and so I'm going to provide an oversimplification of it. But long story short, we understand occupational socialization theory to be a 5-phase model, which describes how a teacher's journey impacts their views and beliefs toward the profession of PE, and then if they end up in higher education, PEAT. You'll also see on the figure there that I used a general trend line, and that is to show the kind of general empirically supported assumptions about the level of impact that one's socialization or phase of socialization has on their views towards the profession. So the acculturation phase, which occurs from birth until they enter their formal teacher education programs, is perceived to be a very strong period in one's life and has a lot of influence on one's views towards the profession. The teacher education phase, code for professional socialization, is actually argued to be among the weakest phases of socialization. Thereafter, having completed formal teacher education, individuals enter, sometimes, not always, immediately into a career in K through 12 teaching. They then move on to advanced studies, be that master's or PhD programs, and then in the context of the United States, they move on to higher education career. We also recognize that this isn't always a straightforward process. There's probably plenty of people on here which have gone through phases of socialization in different orders to the one that I've explained, and that's a part of the theory, and we understand that. So that's a general kind of overview of the theory, and it includes a plethora of theoretical concepts. But I'm more than happy to kind of outline those at another time. Next slide, please. And so the purpose of the study was to describe the impact of occupational socialization on how faculty members utilize and advocate for the spectrum in modern PEAT programs. To do so, we broke this down into 2 research questions. It's how do faculty members utilize the spectrum in their programs? And how has faculty members' occupational socialization shaped their perspectives and practices regarding the spectrum itself, and subsequently its role and use within their PEAT programs? Over to you, Chris.
Thank you. So we used a multiple case study design to collect this data. The case itself was the professors that used the spectrum in research and in some delivery method to their undergraduate students. We purposely sampled this population by only selecting individuals that were identified to us as spectrum scholars. There were two data collection techniques, two semi-structured interviews. Both the interviews were designed to uncover how the spectrum influences stages of socialization. We also collected artifacts like publications, class assignments, podcast information, and previous presentations. We analyzed the data using a two-step method. Saldana explains eclectic coding as an exploratory method where you utilize several different types of coding. For instance, descriptive coding was used the majority of the time. Descriptive coding is similar to open coding, by which you assign lines and paragraphs of transcript codes that describe the participants' experiences. Motion coding was used to code different feelings the participants had to meeting Mosston or Ashworth or feelings toward the spectrum in general. Lastly, in vivo coding, I say that Jamie is the king of in vivo coding. We use that to code specific phrases used by participants, and the code is actually the phrase that was said by the participant. Axial coding was used as a second cycle coding mechanism to categorize the like-minded information relative to the spectrum and the socialization pathway. Trustworthiness was established through peer debriefing and an audit trail. It should be mentioned before the results that additional eclectic coding will take place before publication. Additional trustworthy measures will also be added to ensure data is valid. So this is preliminary. So to start with our results, this is quite a busy table, but it gives you an idea about the different participants we had in this study. We had 7 participants ranging in ages from 30 to 69. Their home countries included Europe, Asia, Australia, and North America. These 7 were assistant professors, associate professors, full professors, and 1 professor emeritus. The faculty members varied in years in higher education from 5 to 32. As far as their socialization path and level of integration, I'll be explaining that in the coming slides. So we decided on 2 major themes with some subcategories that occurred. First, the socialization pathway that led them to the spectrum. These were conventional, meaning it was part of their professional preparation, and unconventional pathway, meaning it was on their own accord. Implementation was categorized in 3 different ways. Exploratory was described as the spectrum is introduced through research or several students that had already displayed effective teaching behaviors would have an upward extension to now try the spectrum. Sectional was described as in 2 classes whereby curriculum is positioned in a certain area to be able to have more time in a specific course to explore the spectrum. And the full integration as seen usually in freshman year or throughout, or in 3 to 5 classes. So 5 of our participants fell into that conventional pathway and 2 fell into that unconventional pathway. Maya, Sarah, Owen, Luke, and Han was in the conventional, and then Amy and Sergis were in the unconventional pathway. So to start here, Maya discusses that the unconventional pathway changed the way she thought about the profession during professional socialization. She said, it's had a major impact, I would say, from my initial training to where I'm at now. Because it was such a big part of my undergraduate experience and it was required in terms of what we're teaching, planning episodes, I had that in my mind at all times when I was structuring lessons. Han discussed the eye-opening experience of seeing his style for the first time and says, when I went to do my master's degree, one of the professors had asked me to follow his courses, which was related to sport pedagogy. So that particular day, he was teaching the practice style of teaching. Coming from education and seeing that type of organization, my first thought was, this is real pedagogy. And then I wanted to learn more about that. Owen was discussing in his undergrad that one of his instructors was the first one to discuss in class the spectrum, and he significantly looked up this individual and said, "Still the best teacher I've ever seen." I can remember asking him a question at some point, and he said, "I'm going to answer that indirectly because it's Style G Day." Moving more towards the unconventional pathway, Amy discussed thinking about making programmatic changes to one course. She did some studying and found some literature like Pangrazi and others. This work was supported, and it was suggested that new material be brought into the course. She said, "When I started teaching, we had a course called Movement Method of Teaching Physical Education, very traditional, old kind of course. And then as I started studying more, I came up with the terms such as teaching science, teaching approaches, and teaching models, and it intrigued me. So I studied that at length." Sergis explained that he was first introduced to the spectrum through a colleague and later by Sarah Ashworth while attending a conference. He said, "And from my colleague's introduction to it, it was then 2009. I was at a conference where Sarah Ashworth was one of the keynote speakers, and Sarah presenting on the spectrum of teaching styles at that event helped me further understand what my colleague was doing in his work, and it was part of my belief on how learning occurs." So moving more towards the implementation side of things, most of the participants described some sort of turning point or catalyst that helped them better implement the spectrum. Sergis said that scaffolding and spiral progression was strong within his program. And he said, "I made it a point to know what was happening in those and understand it. So we could spiral that information up into my topics and then constitute that learning into what we were doing." So they could actually see the continuity, and they were getting a sense of repetition and relevance of what it was to come and to the context and that what we are doing now. Similarly, Maya had a catalyst, and she said, I just wasn't using it to its full potential. I think I transitioned to a very models-based approach because what my PhD program was centered on. I've taught in my methods to a degree the spectrum, but it's kind of like a couple of lessons discussion. The last year, there was a piece of literature that came out on the spectrum and how the spectrum and models are rooted against each other when they shouldn't be. I should be really thinking about this differently, but that paper, I think, just made me go all in. So looking at program implementation and some of the sectionality that we were talking about before, Maya describes strategically positioning curriculum in early years of schooling to allow for more spectrum use. She said, "When they come to me at this point, which is elementary methods, that's when we dive pretty deeply into the spectrum because they've already had like a whole class, for example, on the skill themes approach. And they understand all that so that we can dive into the spectrum more. So because they already have the content development background, we kind of get to skip that. That's the time when we introduce the styles and talk more about the spectrum overall and why it's important, what its structure is like, and how to actively apply it." Luke discussed that it was a department restructure that allowed them to implement the spectrum more fully integrated. He said, "In my first couple of years, I didn't have the time or wasn't supported necessarily in doing the spectrum. But certainly after 2 years, we took our undergraduate program and reshaped it completely. We were asked to do that and wanted to do that. I was in particular including the spectrum, not just in the methods, but with the various teaching labs, curriculum class, and so forth." Sarah described that in her country was keen on using the command and practice, but students did not understand other possibilities. She also discussed the difficulty of the spectrum not being predominant in her country. Nevertheless, she used it as an exploratory method, saying teachers usually use command and practice. So when a student comes to the university, they have this experience. When I show that there are 6 other possibilities, they like that a lot. This is a good way for them to see something different they can differentiate and change their instruction from common practice. So these two these two quotes kind of are different from one another on the flip side of thinking about what a shared technical culture can do. Owen described the difficulty of the program implementation with individuals that might not have an interest in the spectrum. He said, I've worked with lots of different people. Might have been some down years, depending upon who I've been with. Some of who liked it and some who didn't. You can't force people to do it. You can't ram it down their throats. And on the flip side of things, on the shared technical culture, Han described having a more cohesive group from the beginning and described, at least at the beginning, 3 or 4 people were all very familiar with the spectrum. We have done a lot of work. The whole philosophy of incorporating the spectrum and using the spectrum is in our PE program. So then thinking about the discussion relative to socialization and the spectrum here, it should be said that none of the participants had specific memories of the spectrum during their acculturation. Although some of their backgrounds led to adopting and espousing the spectrum in later stages of socialization. I think we see some of the similarities in the literature of curriculum and implementation and subsequent struggles, socialization struggles related to that. Although research about faculty members is relatively new, I think there's a lot of contradiction to comparing literature about practicing K through 12 educators and faculty members. So we see a lot of differences about how faculty members acquire knowledge and how that might not match existing socialization literature. Jamie explained earlier that during that we often see that professional socialization is not as influential. However, that's not what we necessarily saw within these individuals. So moving more towards the implementation side, for more than half of the participants, being able to implement the spectrum with undergraduates really didn't occur until secondary organizational socialization. Their conceptual knowledge of the implementation with K through 12 students was firm, but they suggested it took some sort of catalyst to find its place in their teacher identity and their current curriculum. Among these was finding research that coupled models and teaching styles, attending conferences, presenting with Sarah Ashworth at conferences, continuing research with graduate students, and overall being mentored by other scholars. We know from literature that early career faculty members are heavily influenced by senior faculty, and I think that speaks to the reach of Mosston and Ashworth was simply incredible. Impacted some of our participants with direct contact. Several of our participants discussed being invited to assist in presentations with Sarah, although their knowledge of the spectrum wasn't great at that time. The participants also discussed that some of their mentors worked directly with Mosston or Ashworth, and being mentored by them had a huge impact on their program and their socialization. So continuing on to the implementation based on what we learned, several factors should be considered when implementing the spectrum. Where is an individual currently at within this implementation stages, or where should they start if they have not started implementing? An exploratory method of trying to find some students that have displayed effective teaching behaviors might be a good start. The sectional approach by which reordering some of your curriculum to happen earlier in their schooling so that there's more time to discuss the spectrum is also a good approach. Where we saw it at its best is having scaffolding and progressions of the spectrums with the students, starting very small and then later integrate it more into early field experiences. But this was all completely dictated by the level in which the program had a shared technical culture, meaning all the professors within that program espouse the same pedagogy. Because mentoring was such a common thread amongst our participants, we would call for more PhD programs to discuss how to teach in secondary professional socialization during their PhD programs, how to teach subject matters like the spectrum. We know that research is being covered in a significant way, but that there should be more emphasis placed on program development and curriculum scaffolding during the PhD programs, so that moving into secondary organizational socialization, they're better equipped to teach things like the spectrum that is a big undertaking when you're thinking about it as a whole within your program. With that, we'd like to thank the Spectrum Institute of Teaching and Learning to allow us to share these results and share our findings. And with that, we'll take any questions that anyone might have.
Thank you, Chris and Jamie. We have about 5 minutes for questions.
Probably stop sharing now, Chris, too.
Sure.
I'll start then. I have some questions and some observations, if that's okay. The first question I have is you talked about in the third golden age at the beginning of the presentation about more theoretical moves and changes and what have you.
Yeah.
My question is there a danger of overcomplicating it for teachers? Just like academics managed to almost ruin TGFU by making what was a really simple, straightforward idea unbelievably complicated to the extent where some teachers just gave up on it. So we wrecked that. And I'm concerned that we're going to do the same with this by making it ridiculously overcomplicated to the point where teachers just throw their hands up and say, not for me. What do you think?
I think with all things that's a risk, but I think that's why we need to be very careful and thoughtful. And we're not rushing to make theoretical advancements for the sake of theoretical advancements. We're doing research that contributes to our knowledge of the spectrum, and subsequently, if we can make theoretical developments, then we should. Like, for example, the work by Simpus or Simpiris, I think. Maybe someone will tell me how to say that correctly. But Simpiris et al. They talked about how the reproductive and productive categories might not be the most appropriate phrases for defining the styles, partly because when looked at the styles more closely, they may not be all as kind of direct or indirect as the term states. So that's my response. I think we need to be thoughtful and careful. I think we'd run the risk with it, but I think that's why we take our time, do our due diligence, and work with experts, and get advice from leaders in the field.
Yeah, I think to that point too, I mean, I think that's kind of why we decided to do this, Matt, this particular study, in getting not necessarily to change the spectrum, but to think about how could people start to implement this in their programs in general. And hoping that, people that don't have it in their program right now might find a way to start to integrate that, whether it be at a very low level. And that's kind of the theory behind doing this study in general.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the presentation. It was just that bit at the beginning that struck me, and I was an undergraduate student right at the beginning of Games for Understanding. It was such a simple idea, and I can remember talking to a group of teachers, maybe even 10 years ago, and they were fed up with the overcomplication and all the offshoots of it, and all these different variations of Games for Understanding, and it's just made it overcomplicated. I just got a couple of other observations. One, the idea that models and the spectrum are incompatible seemed just a crazy idea to me. I think that they complement each other perfectly, and it helps teaching. If you're teaching models, if you can find the right styles, once undergraduate students understand what the styles are, it's a perfect match. The second one was you were talking about secondary professional socialization, and that's the place to teach new faculty members how to teach the styles, how to teach the spectrum. Well, that works in the US, where we have coursework in PhD programs, but most of the rest of the world doesn't do that. So PhD programs are just by research, and so it's going to be based on American terms, an expanded dissertation, maybe 8, 9, 10, 11 studies, and maybe nothing to do with the spectrum. So I was just going to suggest when you write the paper up, depending on where you send it, that works for American professors or future professors, but it won't work for anybody else. So that might be worth thinking about.
Thank you.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Got time for one more question.
Akis has his hand up.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone from Greece. I would like to ask, as far as I am concerned, I think the program was practiced for a semester or something. So, do you think that there will be different kind of response from the colleagues or from the teachers if they practiced the program for a consecutive semester? And do you think that there were any differences between the professors that practiced the spectrum in different continents?
That's
Yeah. Go ahead, Jamie.
well.
Go ahead.
I think it's obviously that's a tough task to kind of at this stage of the analysis to kind of be able to make some claims about that. But that's certainly something that we are going to be looking at. So I don't know if we have a solid answer for that question just yet, but we will do.
Yeah, I think where they were all at was dictated by their socialization and specifically their programs themselves, and it was relative to what the shared technical culture really was. As far as different countries, I think Jamie hit it on the head. I don't think that we've seen a specific difference necessarily, but obviously different socialization paths depending upon their country. But make a claim right now, we don't necessarily have a separation between right now.
But I
Thank you.
will add though is obviously we're aware that this stuff began in potentially the English language and then was obviously over the course of the spectrum being developed, especially certain texts, you know, the 2008 text, for example, being translated into other languages. So, you know, based on what we know about the spectrum, we're very confident that there are probably different interpretations of the spectrum that are informed by the culture of different kind of continents. So that's something we are looking out for, and we're very, very aware about that. So
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much for the questions. Great questions, good presentation. Chris and Jamie, thanks much. Let's move on to our second presentation today. And we have Maria Espada Mateos from Universidad Rey Juan Carlos from Madrid, Spain. And the title of her presentation is Virtual Reality and Gamification Combined with Practice Teaching Style in Physical Education. Maria, begin when you're ready.
No, sorry. Can you see my screen?
It just disappeared.
Yeah, we could see it, and then you stopped sharing.
1 second. Now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. I'm Maria Espada from Universidad Rey Juan Carlos in Spain. First of all, I would like to thank to the Spectrum Institute of Teaching and Learning to support this project. We are a research group of 8 people, and I'm the principal investigator. And for this reason, I'm going to do the presentation today, but this project is thanks to the work of all the team. The title of this project is Virtual Reality and Gamification Combined with Practice Teaching Style in Physical Education. In Spain, a decline in motivation toward physical activity has been observed, especially at high school ages. It's very important that physical education teachers use pedagogical tools and methods that increase the motivation and satisfaction of their students towards sport. The spectrum theory in physical education is essential to achieve teaching goals and increase students' motivation and engagement in physical activities and sport. The spectrum is a series of tools that provide physical education teachers with 11 different options to address student diversity and achieve multiple physical education objectives. These teaching styles can be seen to represent the two basic human thinking capacities, reproduction thinking and production thinking. In this sense, there are two clusters of teaching style. The reproduction cluster comprised of style 8 through E, and the production cluster comprised of style F through K. Evidence suggests that the use of the whole range of the spectrum is lacking, and that the tendency is to mostly use those from the reproduction cluster.
I'm sorry, Maria. We can only see the first slide still.
Oh, sorry, I don't know why. Now?
No, I can only see the first slide. Oh, there we go. There you go. Now I can see it. There you go. Now,
Okay,
yeah.
perfect. Thank you. I have said the evidence suggests that the use of whole range of the spectrum is lacking, and that the tendency is to mostly use those from the reproduction cluster. Concretely, a common and practice style are the teaching style that physical education teachers employ the most frequently. In this research, we use the practice style. It is the first style of the spectrum that involves the learning in making some concrete decisions during the teaching learning process, concretely impacting the decision set, which is sealed from the teacher to the learner. So the role of the learner is to make the 9 impact decisions that you can see on the screen in this table. So, physical education teacher prefer teaching center over student-centered teaching style, because they perceive that they can manage student and class time more effectively. But this style do not see to pique the interest or meet the demand of a student in sports in today's society. So with this background, we asked, how can we get the teachers to use a teaching style in which they feel comfortable and at the same time promotion of active participation and involvement of a student to increase their motivation? One of the current areas of pedagogical research is the application of the so-called active methodologies, because involving a student actively in their teaching learning process seems to significantly improve their learning outcome. One of these active methodologies is the gamification. Gamification is a technique that consists of transferring the mechanism of games and video games to the educational environment to modify the acquisition of learning. In the gamification, it's necessary to apply motivational elements, interactive elements, and multimedia elements. And for this one, for the last one, multimedia elements, virtual reality could be an interesting opportunity. So the specific objectives of this study are to analyze the effects of the application of virtual reality and gamification combined with practice teaching style in physical education lessons on students' perceived health, perceived effort, motivation, satisfaction, and motor coordination. In this research, we use a mixed methods research design. For the quantitative technique, we use a quasi-experimental designs. The sample was a total of 75 students, and participants were placed into 3 different classrooms. A different teaching method was randomly allocated to its class group. We have 3 groups. One, the control group, in which we use SITL. Another group was the experimental group 1. In this group, we use a practice style plus gamification. And in the last group, the experimental groups 2, we use a practice style plus gamification and virtual reality. All groups made a pre-test before the intervention. Then we made an intervention with 12 sessions, 2 sessions per week, with each session, the duration was 15 minutes per session. And then all the groups made a post-test. And for the qualitative techniques, we made interviews, individual interviews, 5 interviews per group. And we made as well a focus group to obtain information on the student option and perception. So, I said before, the duration of the intervention was 6 weeks. The 3 study groups followed the premise of the study. For this, the course was divided into 4 different stations. In each of them, a different activity was performed, which was previously explained by the teacher, who gave the signal to change to a different station. During activities performance, the teacher moved through all the station, provided verbal encouragement and feedback. On the right, you can see in this table the activities that we made in each station. Regarding the gamification, we use a concept of avatar to movie. Students were placed into 4 groups, each assigned a Navi badge corresponding to a different avatar characters, and an explain of the score they could achieve in each of the activity was provided, and at the end of each session, each group could exchange the point for a game card that could be used in the following session. Here, below, you can see 2 examples of game card. This card could be used in the next session, so that in the activity on their choose, they will add up to the double the number of points obtained if the group had the card of 50 points. And on the right, you can see the player seats. Each group has 1, and the score, the point of each activity, the teacher writes in this player sheet. And at the end of the lesson, we add the total points, and if the group decide to change for a game card, we write the number of cards that they have. Finally, for the virtual reality session, we had a specific station. In this station, the virtual reality consisted in video games using the Xbox One and a head-mounted display called Oculus Quest 2. The instrument that we use to collect the data for the quantitative techniques, we use questionnaires and tests. We use an instrument for one object of the study. For example, one questionnaire for perceived health, another questionnaire for motivation, another for satisfaction. We made a motor test for the motor coordination, and perceived S4 with this historical children S4 rating table that you can see here below. For the qualitative techniques, as I said before, we use semi-structured interviews. You can see here some of the questions, some example. For example, regarding to the satisfaction, we asked, did you participate less, the same, or more than in the rest of the course in the subject? Why? And also we may focus discussion group. Here, there are some examples of the question. For example, what elements of the intervention motivated you to do the activities better? So for the data analysis, we have, of course, two techniques, the quantitative data and we use an ANOVA test, and for qualitative data, we identify most descriptive context with created different categories and cluster of units. So I will now present some of the most relevant results of this research. Regarding the perceived health, all students increase their perceived health after the intervention, but there aren't differences between groups. The finding in this research were that if a teaching environment is well structured, in this case, for example, with the different station, it is more likely that adolescents will perceive their learning concepts, improve their motor skill and health. And here we have the perceived S4. In this figure, you can see the mean of each week and the three groups. The black is the group that we use the virtual reality plus gamification. And we can see that the group that perceive more effort was the group in which we use only the practice teaching style, the white column. This finding is similar with other study in which greater motivation is formed while using gamification than when the control group. Motor coordination, the three groups of the study improve in hand grip and flamingo tests. Only the groups in which we use the gamification show its improvement in lateral jump test. Only the group that we use virtual reality obtain better result in the plate tapping test. And only the group that we use only the practice teaching style obtain a worsening in the displacement with the support test. And the qualitative result show that in the specific case of the virtual reality activities, no participant expressed that any of the activities within the realm of virtual reality produced any improvement in their motor skill. Also, some participants emphasize that the poor transferability of the virtual activity to the real life. The group in which we use gamification with practice teaching style increase their intrinsic motivation. The student perceive working in stable groups as a positive element, and it increase the variety of proposal of practice time. For example, one participant said, as there were different stations, it's allowed you to always have something to do and not have to wait. The key element of increased motivation in virtual reality group was the use of Google and Xbox. One student said, I knew that being able to use the virtual reality Googles is something that doesn't happen every day in class. So I was trying to make the most of every minute. Regarding the satisfaction, quantitative results show that no difference either within or between groups. But the qualitative results show that the virtual reality group were more satisfied with the physical education lessons because they use virtual reality rather than the gamification part. For example, one student said, I liked it better the day I knew I was playing the virtual reality station because it's different. Another student said, using video games in physical education is a great thing. That made me like the classes more. The group in which we use the gamification mentioned the teamwork as an interesting factor because of the possibility of building more intense relationship with the other classmates. One participant said, what I like most was working in groups. It's more fun than doing things one-on-one or alone. And another said, I found this fun, but no more fun than the rest of the course. And finally, the practice style group did not perceive any difference in terms of satisfaction. For example, one participant said, physical education is better than sitting in class. So I usually like what we do in physical education. I didn't notice that this unit was more or less fun. So the main conclusion in this research is that the use of virtual reality and gamification combined with style B does not seem to influence students' perceived health. The gamification combined with practice teaching style seem to be useful in reducing perceived effort in physical education programs for adolescents in comparison with use-only style B. Gamification, when combined with virtual reality, improvements in motor skill related only with hand-eye coordination. Gamification increased their intrinsic motivation, and virtual reality and gamification the group that used virtual reality and gamification were more satisfied with physical education lessons. This study has some limitations. One of the principal limitations of this research is the highly demanding supervision and preparing that is required to adequately use virtual reality technology. And only in the virtual reality station, we were 3 people. And of course, the high economic cost may impair the regular implication of this material in physical education lessons. However, from a practical perspective, physical education teachers could implement the style B combined with gamification. And it is necessary more research to use virtual reality in education, as this technology has been used much more in other contexts. Here are the reference of the publication from this study. Thank you again to the Spectrum Institute of Teaching and Learning to support these projects. Thank you very much for your attention, and it's a pleasure for me to answer any question or suggestion.
Thank you, Maria. Nice presentation. Questions for Maria?
Maria,
Yes.
can you just clarify, first of all, really interesting presentation. The study looks very complex and interesting. Can you just tell us a bit about the ANOVAs? Were they two-way ANOVAs? Am I right that you did the condition by pre-post? So it was a 2x3 ANOVA, is that right? And you did one of those for each measure?
We made a pre-post to the three groups.
Right.
In this, yes, in this we made questionnaires that the student complete online questionnaire and motor test.
Right. But the actual the ANOVA designs, you did a 2x3 ANOVA, so it was a two-way ANOVA, right? Where you had the three conditions and pre-post. I just wanted to confirm what kind of ANOVAs you were doing.
I don't understand the questions.
Okay, well, let me ask you another one then, sort of related.
The question is for the analysis data?
Yes.
No.
So,
yes,
so you said you used ANOVAs on each of the,
yes.
Right?
Yes.
So were they two-way ANOVAs where you did?
Yes, two-way ANOVAs.
Yes. Okay,
one
right.
for the because we want to relate the relationship, the time, pre-post,
Right,
and the
condition.
Yes,
Right.
and the text of the methods.
Right.
And for this, we use a ANOVA test with two ways. Yes.
Right, and the descriptive data. So you in your, obviously you haven't got a lot of time in the presentation. You talked about differences. What about the descriptive data? So your mean scores and standard deviations. Were the data high? I mean, when they so it's all very well finding a difference. Did they do a lot better, or were the scores mediocre in your view, or which ones were high and which ones were low?
Well, there are a lot of data in this research. So we have to select some of them for this presentation, but there are a lot of data. Depending of the questionnaire, we have a square. For example, a Likert scale in one of them. So I don't know if your question is regarding the pretest, the difference between the pretest to the post-test.
Right, I'm just wondering if you could just give us one example of how good they actually were. So there might have been some improvement, say in the perceived health, but
yes,
was it very high? Was the actual score on the post-test very high?
Yes, because for example, perceived health. Now you can see my screen. No, sorry, 1 second.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah. All right, there we are.
Yeah, in this one, for example, in this table, yes, there are high score in pretest and in post-test as well. For example, in virtual reality and plus gamification, and there are differences regarding the method. Only they perceive high health regarding the interview. Maybe, I don't know, if we didn't do anything different regarding the method, they perceive as well that the health is better because they made 12 lessons more of physical education. So it's for this that we try to identify if the variable group, the teaching method group, has effects or not in the intervention. And in this case, only the p value is less of 0.05 in the time. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Oh, you did very well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We have time for another question.
I believe Aki's raised his hand again.
Yes. Hello. I would like to ask whether success, I mean top scores or best results amongst their fellow pupils affected their levels of motivations in participating or in their involvement in physical education lessons.
Well, as I said in the introduction, here in Spain, the motivation in high school student decrease regarding the motivation in primary level, in primary school. So we thought that maybe if we introduce something different in their class, like virtual reality, for example, or something really new for them, we can improve their motivation and maybe their engagement in sports and other activities out of physical education classes. So we think that it's important that they increase their motivation in physical education lesson to transfer out of the real life to do more exercise or other activities.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll take one last question if there is one.
Yes, if I can ask one quick question. Yeah, thank you, Maria, for your wonderful presentation. I'm considering why do you think that the participants, their perceived health will increase after the intervention? I'm just thinking about what you are doing and the development channels that Mosston hypothesized. But I just can't connect the ideas between the perceived increase health increasement and in this study. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question. So your question is regarding only the perceived health. Why we analyze this variable? It is the question? Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yes.
because we thought that maybe if they are more engagement in the activity with motivational elements such as gamification elements or virtual reality, they don't perceive high effort, and they do more actively the activity. So when finish the unit, the intervention, they perceive more health because they practice more motivation, they practice more actively in the activities. I don't know if you can see the relationship, and this is for this reason that we say, okay, why not study or analyze how they perceive before the intervention, their health, and how perceive their health after the intervention. But of course, the results show that there are differences. So,
Yeah, good. Thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank
That-
you.
That brings to an end session number 4. Thank you very much to the presenters today. We have session 5 coming up on Friday, May 10th, same time, and that is our last session for the 2024 Spectrum Institute for Teaching and Learning Workshop Series. Thanks for attending, and I hope the rest of your day, at least at my end, I still have some of the day, maybe not so in Taiwan and so forth, but I hope that the rest of your day and the weekend goes well. Thanks very much for attending, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mark.
Bye.
Thank you,
everyone.
everybody.
Bye.
Thank you all.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. See you.
See you. Have a nice day.